It all started on an ordinary Saturday morning, or so I thought. The house was buzzing with its usual weekend energy, kids running around, my husband tinkering with something in the garage, and me folding laundry in the living room. Everything felt normal, predictable even. But in a house full of kids, predictable can change in an instant, and that's exactly what happened that day. I heard the bathroom door creak open, followed by hurried footsteps. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flash of movement. My stepson, James, darting across the hallway. The funny part? He wasn't exactly fully dressed. He had forgotten his towel and, in a panic, had wrapped himself in what looked like the smallest thing he could grab, one of those hand towels you keep for guests. It barely covered anything, and he was clutching it as though his life depended on it. Now James is at that awkward age, 13, almost 14. Too old to be called a kid, but not quite ready to navigate life with the cool confidence of a teenager. You know the stage, where everything feels like the most embarrassing moment of your life. And here he was, caught in what had to be, for him, the ultimate cringe-worthy situation. As soon as he noticed I had seen him, his face turned beet red. Uh, don't look, he blurted out, almost tripping over his own feet as he bolted toward his bedroom. I tried to stifle my laughter, not wanting to make the situation worse for him. But let's be real, it was hilarious in the most innocent way possible. But then something clicked. Why didn't he just shout for help? I was right there in the living room. He could have called me to grab his towel. Was he embarrassed? Did he think I'd tease him? Or was it something deeper, something about how our blended family was still figuring out our rhythm? It got me thinking about all the little ways kids show us who they are, even in moments like these. James wasn't just a kid forgetting his towel. He was a teenager trying to navigate his independence, his pride, and that confusing line between childhood and growing up. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as funny as it first seemed. Later, as I folded the last of the laundry, I wondered if I should talk to him about it or let the moment pass. Was this one of those times where a little conversation could make a big difference? Or was it better to leave it as one of those funny, fleeting memories we all laugh about later? Just when I thought the moment was over, I heard a knock on the door. It was James, standing there fully dressed, holding the forgotten towel. Uh, thanks for not laughing too much, he said with an awkward grin. I smiled back, unsure if I should say something or just let the silence fill the space. But what happened next completely caught me off guard. I looked at James, standing there with his awkward grin and the towel draped over his arm like it was some kind of peace offering. It was one of those moments where time seems to slow down and a million thoughts race through your head. Should I crack a joke to lighten the mood, or should I ask him how he's really feeling? Before I could decide, James spoke again, his voice a little more serious this time. It's just, I didn't want to yell for help. It felt weird. Weird. That word hit me harder than I expected. It summed up everything about being a teenager, didn't it? Weird body changes, weird emotions, weird moments when you're not sure where you fit in. And maybe, just maybe, it summed up something about our family, too. Blended families are their own kind of weird. They're full of love and effort, but also misunderstandings and little gaps you can't always figure out how to fill. James and I weren't exactly strangers, but we weren't quite as close as I was with my own kids either. There was still a layer of formality between us, like we were both waiting for the other to make the first move toward something deeper. I get it, I finally said, keeping my tone light. You're at that age where yelling for a towel feels like a whole public announcement. He laughed a little, but there was something guarded in his expression. He shrugged as if to say, yeah, maybe. The truth was, I didn't know much about what was going on in James's head these days. He had moved in with us full-time only a few months ago, after his mom took a new job in another city. Adjusting to a new school, a new house, and a new family dynamic all at once had to be overwhelming. But like most teenagers, James wasn't exactly volunteering his feelings. He mostly stayed in his room or hung out with his younger step siblings, playing video games or kicking a soccer ball around in the backyard. Moments like this, raw, unplanned, and real, felt rare, like tiny windows into his world. As he lingered in the doorway, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else he wasn't saying, something he wanted to share but didn't know how. The air between us felt heavy, like we were teetering on the edge of a conversation that could either bring us closer or make things more awkward. And then, just as quickly as the moment had arrived, James nodded, mumbled, "Thanks," and disappeared back into his room, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. That night, as I replayed the day's events in my mind, I realized this wasn't just about a towel. It was about trust, about connection, and about all the unspoken things that come with building a family. But the real question was, how do you bridge that gap when the other person doesn't know how to meet you halfway? And more importantly, was I ready to take the first step? Later that evening, I found myself in the kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring a pot of pasta while my thoughts kept circling back to James. The towel incident was funny, sure, but it felt like it had cracked open something bigger, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I kept replaying his expression, the way his laugh didn't quite reach his eyes, the way he lingered like he wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. It wasn't like James to hold back. Normally, he was the kind of kid who had no problem speaking his mind, even if it meant clashing with me or his dad. So, why did he seem so unsure of himself now? As I stood there, my husband walked in, carrying a toolbox. He glanced at me and immediately picked up on my distracted mood. "You're quiet," he said, setting the tools down on the counter. "Something on your mind?" I hesitated, wondering if I was making a big deal out of nothing. "It's James," I finally admitted. "I think I don't know, going through something. He seemed off earlier." My husband frowned, but didn't seem surprised. "He's been spending a lot of time alone lately," he said, leaning against the counter. "Maybe it's just teenage stuff. You know how it is." I nodded, but something in my gut told me it was more than that. I thought about the move, the new school, and how much his life had changed in such a short time. Was he struggling to fit in, feeling lost in the shuffle of our busy household? Or was it something deeper, something he didn't even know how to talk about? The sound of footsteps interrupted my thoughts. James walked into the kitchen, pausing when he saw us. He looked at me, then at his dad, like he was trying to decide whether to say something or retreat. The tension was almost palpable, and I held my breath, wondering if this was the moment he'd finally open up, or if he'd let it slip away again. James stood there in the kitchen doorway, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His eyes darted between me and his dad, and for a split second, I thought he was going to say something. But then he hesitated, his shoulders dropping slightly, as if the effort to speak was just too much. "What's up, bud?" my husband asked casually, his tone warm but curious. James shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Nothing, just, I'm hungry. Is dinner ready?" It was such a simple question, but there was a tremor in his voice, barely noticeable unless you were really listening. I could feel the tension building in the room, like we were all tiptoeing around something unspoken. "It'll be ready in a few minutes," I said, keeping my voice light. "Why don't you sit down?" He hesitated again, then slowly pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. He didn't pull out his phone or start scrolling like he usually did. Instead, he just sat there, staring at the table, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the wood grain. The silence stretched on, growing heavier with each passing second. My husband and I exchanged a quick glance, both of us sensing that James was on the verge of saying something important, but we didn't push him. Sometimes with James, the more you tried to dig, the more he'd retreat. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you think it's hard to fit in? The question hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. It was such a simple thing to ask, but the way he said it made it feel like the weight of the world was behind it. I stopped stirring the pasta, my heart tightening. Fit in where? I asked gently, trying not to break the fragile moment. Anywhere, he said, looking up at me with eyes that seemed older than his years. Here, school, with everything. His words trailed off, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't just about a towel or a move, or even being a teenager. It was about something much bigger, and I could feel the storm brewing just beneath the surface. The room grew colder as Mia stared at the ornate key in her trembling hand, its metallic edges glowing faintly under the dim light. The cryptic note left behind by her mother had promised answers, but this was far from what she had imagined. Behind her, Liam shifted uneasily, his flashlight sweeping over the decaying walls of the abandoned estate. This doesn't make sense, he muttered, breaking the silence. If your mom was trying to protect you, why lead you here? To this place? Mia didn't answer. Her heart pounded in her chest as memories flooded back. Snippets of hushed conversations, the way her mother's voice would drop whenever the name Calder was mentioned. This house wasn't just a forgotten relic of the past. It was a puzzle piece in a game far bigger than she had realized. She slipped the key into her pocket and turned toward the heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway. The air felt thick, almost alive, as if the house itself was holding its breath. With every step, the floor groaned beneath her feet, echoing like a warning. Liam reached for her arm, his voice low but urgent. Mia, wait, are we even sure about this? What if... A loud crash from upstairs cut him off. Both froze, their eyes snapping to the ceiling as dust rained down around them. The sound of hurried footsteps followed, heavy and deliberate, as though someone, or something, was pacing directly above them. Mia swallowed hard. We have to keep going, she whispered, though her voice betrayed her fear. As they pushed the door open, the room beyond was unlike anything they had seen so far. The walls were lined with shelves of ancient books, their spines cracked and faded, but it was the table in the center that held their attention. A map was spread across it, marked with red X's that traced a path straight to their small town. Beneath the map lay a photograph, an old family portrait. Mia's blood ran cold as she recognized the faces. Her mother wasn't just in the picture. She was standing arm in arm with a man Mia had never seen before, but whose face was unmistakably her own. Who is he? Liam asked, his voice barely audible. Mia's fingers tightened around the key. I don't know, she said, but deep down, a part of her already did. Mia's heart raced as she and Liam stared at the photograph. The man next to her mother looked like an older version of herself. Same sharp eyes, same angular jawline. Her mind spun, searching for answers, but the truth felt just out of reach. She turned back to the map, her eyes tracing the red X's, realizing they marked more than just locations. They marked disappearances. People from their town had vanished without explanation, and now it all seemed connected. Before she could piece it together, the sound of footsteps returned, louder this time, descending the staircase outside the room. Mia grabbed Liam's arm, and they both froze. Whoever, or whatever, was coming wasn't trying to hide anymore. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a figure in the shadows. A tall man stepped forward, his face partially obscured by the flickering light. But Mia didn't need to see his face fully. She recognized him from the photograph. Her breath hitched. "You're not supposed to be here," the man said, his voice calm but chilling. "Who are you?" Mia demanded, though her voice wavered. "And what does this have to do with my mother?" He stepped closer, the dim light illuminating his face. There was no mistaking it now. He was her father. The man smiled faintly, but it wasn't comforting. "Your mother tried to protect you from the truth. From me," he said, "but she underestimated how much of me is in you." Mia shook her head, backing away. "You don't make any sense. What truth?" He gestured to the map. "This isn't just a random pattern. It's a cycle, a balance. Your mother and I were part of something bigger, something ancient, and you're the key to it all." Liam stepped in front of Mia protectively. "She's not part of whatever this is. Leave her alone." The man tilted his head, amused. "It's not up to her. It never was." The room seemed to pulse, the air thickening. The books on the shelves began to shake, and the map glowed faintly, as though alive. A realization struck Mia like lightning. She wasn't just meant to uncover the truth, she was meant to continue it. But then, just as her father reached for her, Mia turned the key in her pocket. A sudden burst of light engulfed the room, and when it faded, he was gone. Liam looked at her, stunned. What just happened? Mia stared at the empty space where her father had stood, her hands trembling. "I don't know," she whispered, but deep down, she had a feeling this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The room was eerily silent after the light faded, the weight of everything that had just happened settling over Mia and Liam. She stood there, her chest rising and falling with each shaky breath, her fingers still clutching the now cool key. The faint glow of the map had disappeared, leaving only the faded markings on its surface. Liam stepped closer, his voice gentle but edged with concern. "Mia, are you okay?" She nodded slowly, though the question seemed impossible to answer. I think it's over," she said, but her tone carried uncertainty. She couldn't shake the feeling that her father's words, the cryptic talk of cycles and balance, still lingered in the air, like an unfinished melody. Liam glanced at the photograph, then back at Mia. "You saved us. Whatever he was planning, you stopped it." Mia let out a shaky breath, the weight of everything finally catching up to her. "If I stopped it," she said quietly, "then why does it still feel like something's missing?" She looked at the map again, her mind replaying her father's words. Maybe it wasn't about stopping anything. Maybe it was about choosing a different path. They left the estate as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the once ominous structure behind them now just a shadow against the morning sky. The key hung around Mia's neck now, resting against her chest like a reminder of what she had faced and what she had lost. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't the person she was when this all began. Back in town, things slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as they could be. The disappearances stopped, and the unease that had hung over the community for years began to lift. But for Mia, the journey wasn't something she could leave behind completely. She found herself spending hours researching the markings on the map, tracing the history of her family, and trying to piece together the fragments of a story that spanned far beyond her own lifetime. One evening, as she and Liam sat by the lake, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she finally allowed herself a moment of peace. "Whatever's next," she said softly, "I'll be ready for it." Liam smiled, his hand resting on hers. "You don't have to face it alone." For the first time in weeks, Mia smiled back, feeling a flicker of hope. The mystery wasn't fully solved, but the weight of it no longer felt unbearable. It was a new beginning, one she was finally ready to embrace.